Hello! Happy Friday! Once again. Oh, look who it is. Hello, Farmhouse. Hello, Benedict. Hi. How is it going? It's Friday. There's a puppy. Oh, he's sneezy. Didn't you get some dust in your snoot? He got a cute butt. Yeah, you. Right? Look at that puppy. Hmm. What is new? Farmhouse, I haven't seen you in so long. What's new? You might eat a cupcake. That's good. Where's everybody else? Where's everybody else? I got this notice here on Twitch saying Friends, like the Friends system, is going away on May 25th. Once removed, you will no longer see which friends are online. Seems like a strange thing to remove. Is that something that people are abusing? Like, why would they not want you to see which of your friends are online, I wonder? Hi, Sharkies! Happy Friday! How's it going? How is the start of your weekend? Farmhouse and I went to see a play yesterday. As I think I mentioned before we were going to. We went and saw Calendar Girls, which was pretty entertaining. It had some sad parts to it. Definitely had a few sad parts. Harmo says, it had adult themes. Some colds? Oh boy. That's unfortunate. I'm sorry to hear that. One thing that I did notice during this whole pandemic situation is because I was being so careful, all the COVID precautions. Why are those lights on? Hey Google, turn off kitchen lights. I must have.
Got it. Turning 3 lights off.
Yeah, I know why. Anyways, because of all the pandemic precautions and everything, just in general, I got sick a lot less. Um, I didn't get my usual like springtime colds or like I never caught the flu. Um, yeah, it's not to say that I was necessarily like that much healthier per se, but but I didn't really get sick very much. That said, I think it's probably a little bit easier for me to avoid that kind of thing than for you guys because I don't have kids, and I imagine that makes avoiding getting sick a little trickier. Been sick fewer times the past 2 years too. Yeah, yeah. What I was just saying, with small kids, it's bound to happen sometimes. Yeah, definitely. It's just part and parcel. Looking at in my camera here the Ms. Marvel poster I've got up here, and that's getting a TV, well, like a Disney Plus series. And in like a week, the new Doctor Strange movie comes out, Multiverse of Madness, which I believe, when they initially announced it, they said it was going to be Marvel's first like horror film. Like it was supposed to be actively scary. Moon Knight has been a little bit like creepier, I think. I wouldn't actually consider it scary, but it's been creepier. So if Doctor Strange goes beyond that, but I don't know, I haven't heard that much about the scary aspect of it more recently. So I'm wondering if they are backpedaling on that, or if it's going to actually be a scary movie. Mrs. has read the first 2 or 3 Ms. Marvel comics and liked it. Yeah, I know our friend Erica really likes them. I like the character a lot. I haven't read much of the comics for this particular character. Like, I think she's really cool. I've played the Marvel's Avengers game in which she was the like primary protagonist. You saw most of like the storyline through her sort of point of view, but I don't know, it's probably a different plot line than the comics followed. So yeah, I mean, I know a bit about the character, but I haven't actually gotten down to reading the comics myself. I'd like to, though. I think I will. Pharma says, school 5 days a week means they're exposed to a lot more people regularly. Pharma has had 4 days a week at most, and for a lot less time each day than grade school kids would be. Yeah, and I mean, also, your school is at university, and I don't know, there's probably a lot less close proximity to the other students than younger kids might have. Less likely for someone, hopefully, to come straight up to you and sneeze in your face. Larger physical classrooms per capita, Pharma says. But yeah, I'm curious about the Doctor Strange movie. I'm excited because I know of at least, less likely though, still not 0, says Sharkies. Yeah, it can happen. It's just a lower probability. But yeah, there's at least one character that has been in the trailers that I'm excited for. But I don't know if I should say, like, I don't want to spoil anything for anyone, even if I just know of it because I saw it in a trailer. But it looks like, I think just the premise of the movie, Doctor Strange, multiverse, just from the title, we know that Doctor Strange is going to be going to weird places. And I think they'll probably use it as an opportunity to introduce new characters. Like, I know they're going to, like, there's some characters that have been in the trailers, but I'm wondering if they're gonna like introduce, like if they've got someone big up their sleeve. Sharky's thought the first Strange movie was meh. I enjoyed it. No, honestly, I actually enjoyed it. I'm not gonna I'm not gonna downplay that at all. I had a good time with that movie. But you like the character better when he's been a foil to other characters. Yeah, well, another thing that I've picked up from the trailers is I think they might be playing off of the What If series that's been on Disney Plus. So Now, the What If series was kind of meh to me. Um, I don't know. It just wasn't exactly. I've never been that interested in like the What If comics and things like that because there's a What If series of comics that are all just they're literally that title. What if blank, right? What if I don't know, Wolverine killed the Hulk or something like that. On the other hand, you liked it. Okay, you liked the What If series. That's funny. It's just it's not that I think that it was bad. Um, it's that the premise has never stood out as interesting to me. I actually like I don't know. I feel like there's enough storytelling with the actual plots that some of these, what if plot points because I guess it's because I know from the get-go that they're going to be these like what one-off, you know, not connected to anything, never revisited because they're not canon from the beginning. And so I think I kind of prefer the ongoing story. Um, so that's probably why. But that said, the What If series, like, it was entertaining. Um, well, I've seen, and Farmos has seen all of the What If series. But yeah. Um, so yeah, I'm looking forward to this Doctor Strange movie. Like I was saying, I'm wondering whether they're gonna like be sneaky and introduce something big, right? Like change something in a really big way, or introduce like a really like headline style character through that film. I think people are always kind of wondering that sort of thing, but this is definitely a good way to do it. To maybe introduce some of the characters that that the MCU has reacquired or whatever. There was the whole Disney buying Fox stuff that I think got them some properties back and things like that. Yeah, yeah. So I'm wondering whether they might use this multiverse exploration as an opportunity to introduce characters that might otherwise be difficult to introduce. Like, because there's characters where it would be weird to just have them show up fresh out of nowhere because they're supposed to be these, like, either there's a lot of them, like, for instance, the X-Men, right? It'd be weird if just suddenly the X-Men showed up with no explanation because it would be kind of like, well, where have you been all this time? But if they got introduced through a multiverse, sort of like universe merging or something like that, you hadn't heard that it's meant to be horror? Um, Gory horror you don't like, but eldritch psychological horror you can get into. I doubt they would go too gory. Um, Hopefully, it's not too many like jump scares because I'm just not into those. The eldritch side of things, it could absolutely be. Yeah, when they first started talking about this film, like years ago, they said it was going to be the MCU's first horror movie. Um, Former means before. Latter means later. That's how I remember it. Latter, you literally remove one T and you get the word later. Also, former starts with F, just like first, so the first one is the former. Yeah, like I said, that's what they initially said, but I haven't. To be fair, I don't also read up, but like I don't follow a lot of this stuff closely. It's just kind of if something crosses my news feed or something like that, then I catch it. And we've seen trailers for this film before other movies have gone to see and things like that. Um, so I have like, while I haven't gone and like intentionally watched the most recent trailers, I have seen at least one trailer. So there are definitely characters I'm excited about. as I said. Things I'm curious about. I'm wondering how big they're gonna go. Farmouse and I are gonna have some Persian food for dinner. I'm gonna have some kebab, some chicken kebabs with saffron rice and grilled tomato. So that's gonna be tasty. I think Farmos is having like a chicken stew with like pomegranate molasses, which, you know, that sounded good. Last time we ordered from there, I got I want to say Zeresk Palau, which is like sort of a grilled marinated chicken on saffron rice with like dried pomegranate bits and onion cooked in. Persian rice is very good. My parents had Persian friends while I was growing up, so I had a lot of Persian food when I was younger. So it's something that's very familiar to me, though there's a period of time in between where I haven't had a lot of it. Farmo says there used to be one in Chilliwack which had good food, but it wasn't well attended. Thinks it may have been a bit niche for Chilliwack. Maybe not well advertised. That's a polite way of putting it. Niche for Chilliwack. When I was like 20-ish, I I went through this like job placement thing through the YMCA, and I ended up like getting a job for like 6 months with the RCMP. But part of like there was a course I kind of had to do ahead of time for that through the YMCA, and part of that was this interview, and someone came from Vancouver to Chilliwack to do the interview. And so, we were talking about why I was in the program, and at the time, it was during kind of a period of time where it was tough to get work, tough to find work. And the person during the interview, we were talking about like difficulties getting work and things like that. And at one point she goes, "Yeah, and Chilliwack's pretty white bread, isn't it?" And I laughed. Sharky say there's a Persian restaurant near a sushi restaurant you frequent. So every time you think you need to try. Persian rice, very good. If you like lamb or like marinated chicken, those are always going to be good. But yeah, whatever you get, make sure you get something that comes with rice, because I feel like that's going to be one of the like saffron rice. You'll enjoy it. And I feel like, honestly, I don't think there's anything that I would consider too unusual in Persian cooking generally. Like it'll probably be seasoned a little differently than you might be used to. But it's not like I find if I'm going to an authentic Chinese restaurant, there are some things that I don't know, that I don't want to eat, right? Or that I don't know how to eat. I just it's not that I think that food is bad. It's that I'm not experienced personally in eating it, and so it's unfamiliar to me. And some of the things like I don't even know how you would approach eating like chicken necks or chicken feet, and I don't think it's wrong to eat that kind of thing. Or like I don't want to say it's gross, because it's just a cultural thing that I'm not accustomed to. Tomatoes and eggplant sounds Persian. There was definitely just an eggplant dish on the menu at the place we were ordering from, and yeah, like tomatoes is that sounds not unlikely that that was Persian. If you said I think we've had, so well, and you get like pomegranate and things like that, and raisins sometimes in like Persian rice dishes. So like raisins and fruit in rice may be unfamiliar to some people, so that might be something you might consider different, right? But yeah, for the most part, I think there's not anything that I think many people would around here would find like offensive in the food, um, palate wise. How about that book, huh? We had a lot of innuendo in the last time we read this one. I had forgotten how much innuendo there was in this book. It may have just be like it may not be throughout the whole book like that, but just in the few, the like 14 pages we read, there were at least like four instances. Pickled herring. Good for you. Yeah, agreed. Every culture has dishes that are normal to some and unusual to others. Though that said, I do feel like for the most part, any food that I wonder from the food that I would consider familiar in Canadian cuisine, what of that would be weird to other cultures, I wonder. Like, I know definitely there are places where they don't eat burgers and hot dogs and things as frequently, but that just seems so boring, right? Probably because I'm familiar with it, is because it's the reason it seems boring. But you don't like poutine? Never liked gravy on potatoes. Hmm. I don't think beans on toast is that weird. Um, no, that's not strange to me. It's not something that I would exactly go out of my way to prepare for myself unless it was all that was available. Um, I remember reading this account of, I think it was some Americans that were maybe visiting Italy. I'm not 100% confident on that, so I may be misrepresenting things. But they like stopped at this restaurant, and the chef was made aware that there were Americans visiting, and I guess they like ordered their burger, and the chef wanted to know like what they thought of his burger. And so the chef like came out when they were like trying the burger, and apparently everyone in the restaurant was really impressed that they just like picked it up and ate it with their hands, like no knife and fork. And it was like, oh, they know what they're doing. Sharkies think the links that Canadian cuisine goes to fry food maybe is is unusual to other cultures. That's funny. I feel like there are some southern United States things that I would consider weird. Um, like I think it's just called a fry or a boil. It's probably called a boil, where they just like toss some seafood in a pot and dump like a bag of corn on the cob into the pot, and just seasonings go in, and just all this stuff goes in, and then it all gets boiled together, and then it basically gets like poured out on a table, and everyone just kind of like eats that. I don't know. That seems where most thinks American barbecue is pretty different. Grits. Grits is just like a different style of oatmeal, right? Like kind of a porridgey sort of thing. Because if potato, I thought it was like a wheat-based thing. Because that doesn't seem that weird to me. That's just I don't know, like oatmeal, gruel. It's just sort of a thing. Rice porridge. I feel like a lot of cultures have some kind of porridge. I watched a YouTube video of this woman from Japan who I think maybe her husband was American, and she traveled with him to the States, and then she made this video of like things that she thought were weird. Grits was one of, well, not necessarily weird, but that she wasn't familiar with. And so grits was one of the things she talked about, and she compared it, I think, to like rice porridge. Um, I'm trying to think of some of the other stuff from that video. It was interesting being like, oh, look, she's talking about something that does not seem that weird. I wonder if she talked about waffles, maybe? I'm not sure. Should I say, honestly, I've been Canadian my whole life, and yet it's still weird how often we eat highly processed food far removed from their natural state. It's it's a little sad that it's difficult to avoid, right? It feels like if you don't like, we eat it because it's cheap and fast. And the way a lot of people's work life structure is balanced. We frequently eat on the go. Um, and yeah, not very affordable to avoid, like you're saying. Um, so yeah, it's it is pervasive, and that makes it just difficult to avoid. It's interesting that like everywhere you go, you'll find a drive-through burger place, right? And most of those places will also have, maybe like a chicken burger option, maybe a fish burger option, though I don't usually go near fast food fish myself. And by usually, I mean I cannot remember the last time I had anything like that. Um, but you don't really find like drive through just sandwich places, right? Like somewhere where you could get just like the closest I guess would be like Subway or Quiznos, but those aren't drive through. Um, at least I've never seen a drive through option. We've spent half an hour talking about food and movies and things. I started to talk about the book and then got sidetracked again, drawn back in. Why don't we get to this? Um, so little baby Tom John, as he's apparently been named, one of those two different people said different names at the same time, and they just stuck the two names together, and there you go, Tom John. Sharkies are saying in the UK, Subway lost a lawsuit about their bread actually being bread. Pharma says Tim Hortons has sandwiches. Yeah, I guess I forget that Tim Hortons exists a lot of the times, except for just as like a cultural thing. Almost never go to Tim Hortons these days. I used to go occasionally. There was a period of time where I probably went semi-regularly even. But yeah, not so much. Anyways, Baby Tom John was adopted out to Mr. and Mrs. Vittoler. Sharky say, Little Baby Tom John sounds like a song. Little Baby Tom John walking through the forest. Scooping up the field mice? That song always freaked me out as a kid. I don't know if I saw like a little cartoon that went with it that was like creepy or something, but the song, I don't know, freaked me out. And Duke Felmet is kind of losing it, huh? Having nightmares about stabbing the king of Lancre. And scrubbing his hands with steel wool. Now they're all bandaged up and bleeding. And it sounds like Lady Felmet is, if it's the best case scenario, firing a lot of the kitchen staff. Worst case and more likely scenario, possibly having a lot of them executed. So things are not in the best situation at Lancre Castle currently. And now the fool has been, for some reason, removed from the stables and made to sleep in the hallway outside the Duke's chambers. Books, Brews, and Booze, hey! Happy Friday! We have not actually started reading yet. We were talking about movies and food and things. Though I think I'm just about to get into it. So you showed up just in time. Sharky say, Arg, I still see blood. Scrubs with steel wool. Gah, more blood. Yeah. It's weird how that works, right? You'd think you could scrub the blood away, but it keeps showing up for some reason. You're feeding cats? How is Precious doing? I hope your kitty is okay. Please give your cats pets. But, you know, feel free to finish feeding them before you reply. All right. So speaking of the I can see blood, the last line where we left off was blood was oozing between the bandages on his hand. Ugh. All right, so I am on page 48 in my copy, which I think it sounded like 1 to 3 months with Precious. Oh, jeez. I'm so sorry. Yeah, when you said on Wednesday that it was kidney troubles, I was worried, because I know that, kidney troubles can be very serious for cats. Well, just gotta give Kitty all the love you can. You were going to stream tonight, but just slept instead. Yeah, that's a reasonable reaction. I get that. Stress sometimes just makes me want to pass out too. I'm going to start reading. Once again, the full moon rode the clouds. Granny Weatherwax milked and fed the goats, banked the fire, put a cloth over the mirror, and pulled her broomstick out from behind the door. Put a cloth over the mirror. That's an interesting thing to mention. That's not something that I would ever consider doing myself. I've never covered up mirrors before leaving the house. And pulled her broomstick out from behind the door. She went out, locked the back door behind her, and hung the key on its nail in the privy. This was quite sufficient. Only once, in the entire history of witchery in the Ramtops, had a thief broken into a witch's cottage. The witch concerned visited the most terrible punishment on him. Footnote: she did nothing, although sometimes when she saw him in the village, she'd smile in a faint, puzzled way. After 3 weeks of this, the suspense was too much for him, and he took his own life. In fact, he took it all the way across the continent, where he became a reformed character and never went home again. End of footnote. A most terrible punishment. She gave him a puzzled look in town. Granny sat on the broom and muttered a few words, but without much conviction. After a further couple of tries, she got off, fiddled with the binding, and had another go. There was a suspicion of glitter from one end of the stick, which quickly died away. "Drat," she said, under her breath. She looked around carefully, in case anyone was watching. In fact, it was only a hunting badger who, hearing the thumping of running feet, poked its head out from the bushes and saw Granny hurtling down the path with the broomstick held stiff-armed beside her. At last the magic caught, and she managed to vault clumsily onto it before it trundled into the night sky, as gracefully as a duck with one wing missing. Sometimes you just gotta get a running start. From above the trees came a muffled curse against all dwarfish mechanics. Most witches preferred to live in isolated cottages, with the traditional curly chimneys and weed-grown thatch. Granny Weatherwax approved of this. It was no good being a witch unless you let people know. Nanny Ogg didn't care much about what people knew, and even less for what they thought, and lived in a new, knick-knack-crammed cottage in the middle of Lanker town itself, and at the heart of her own private empire. Various daughters and daughters-in-law came to cook and clean on a sort of rota. Every flat surface was stuffed with ornaments brought back by far-traveling members of the family. Sons and grandsons kept the log pile stacked, the roof shingled, the chimney swept. The drinks cupboard was always full, the pouch by her rocking chair always stuffed with tobacco. Above the hearth was a huge pokerwork sign saying, "Mother." No tyrant in the whole history of the world had ever achieved a domination so complete. Nanny Ogg also kept a cat, a huge, one-eyed gray tom called Grebo, who divided his time between sleeping, eating, and fathering the most enormous, incestuous feline tribe. He opened his eye like a yellow window into hell when he heard Granny's broomstick land awkwardly on the back lawn. With the instinct of his kind, he recognized Granny as an inveterate cat-hater and oozed gently under a chair. Apparently Death and Granny might not get along. Farmos had forgotten what Grebo's name was. Magrat was already seated primly by the fire. It is one of the few unbendable rules of magic that its practitioners cannot change their own appearance for any length of time. So no polymorphing spells, apparently. Their bodies develop a kind of morphic inertia and gradually return to their original shape. Oh, okay. So gradually. So when it says for any length of time, it means for any long period of time. But Magrat tried. Every morning her hair was long, thick, and blonde. But by the evening it had always returned to its normal worried frizz. To ameliorate the effect, she had tried to plait violets and cowslips in it. The result was not all she had hoped. It gave the impression that a window box had fallen on her head. "Good evening," said Granny. "Well met by moonlight," said Magrat politely. "Merry meet. A star shines on—" "Watcha," said Nanny Og. Magrat winced. Granny sat down and started removing the pins that nailed her tall hat to her bun. Finally, the sight of Magrat dawned on her. "Magrat!" The young witch jumped and clamped her knuckly hands to the virtuous frontage of her gown. Hopefully I didn't mispronounce that word. Farmos feels that. Says my hair tends to start off hopefully, but has generally lost its oomph by the end of the day. "Yes?" she quavered. "What have you got on your lap?" "It's my familiar," she said defensively. "What happened to the toad you had?" "It wandered off," muttered Magrat. "Anyway, it wasn't very good." Granny sighed. Magrat's desperate search for a reliable familiar had been going on for some time, and despite the love and attention she lavished on them, they all seemed to have some terrible flaw, such as a tendency to bite, get trodden on, or, in extreme cases, metamorphose. "That makes 15 this year," said Granny, "not counting the horse. What's this one?" "It's a rock," chuckled Nanny Og. Forget pet rocks. Magrat's got a familiar rock. "Well, at least it should last," said Granny. The rock extended a head and gave her a look of mild amusement. "It's a tortoise," said Magrat. "I bought it down in Sheepridge Market. It's incredibly old and knows many secrets," the man said. "I know that man," said Granny. "He's the one who sells goldfish that tarnish after a day or two." "Anyway, I shall call him Lightfoot," said Magrat, her voice warm with defiance. "I can if I want." Yes, all right, I'm sure," said Granny. "Anyway, how goes it, sisters? It is 2 months since last we met." Farmo says, "Well, not as likely to run away." Yeah. It should be every new moon, said Magrat sternly. Regular. It was our Graham's youngest's wedding, said Nanny Og. Couldn't miss it. And I was up all night with a sick goat, said Granny Weatherwax promptly. Sharky's wondering if the tortoise's name is Gordon. Yes, well, said Magrat doubtfully. She rummaged in her bag. Anyway, if we're going to start, we'd better light the candles. The senior witches exchanged a resigned glance. But we got this lovely new lamp Tracy sent me, said Nanny Og innocently. And I was going to poke up the fire a bit. I have excellent night vision, Magrat, said Granny sternly. And you've been reading them funny books. Grimmers. Grimoires? You ain't going to draw on the floor again, neither, warned Nanny Og. It took our Dreen days to clean up all those wasp names last time. Runes, said Magrat. There was a look of pleading in her eyes. Look, just one candle? All right, said Nanny Og, relenting a bit. If it makes you feel any better. Just the one, mind. And a decent white one. Nothing fancy. Magrat sighed. It probably wasn't a good idea to bring out the rest of the contents of her bag. We ought to get a few more here, she said sadly. It's not right, a coven of 3. I didn't know we was still a coven. No one told me we was still a coven, sniffed Granny Weatherwax. Anyway, there's no one else this side of the mountain, excepting old Gammer Dismas, and she doesn't get out these days. But a lot of young girls in my village, said Magrat. You know, they could be keen. That's not how we do it, as well you know, said Granny disapprovingly. People don't go and find witchcraft. It comes and finds them. Yes, yes, said Magrat. Sorry. Right, said Granny, slightly mollified. She'd never mastered the talent for apologizing, but she appreciated it in other people. What about this new Duke, then? Said Nanny, to lighten the atmosphere. Granny sat back. He had some houses burned down in Bad Ass, she said, because of taxes. How horrible, said Magrat. Old King Verence used to do that, said Nanny. Terrible temper he had. He used to let people get out first, though, said Granny. Oh, yes, said Nanny, who was a staunch royalist. He could be very gracious like that. He'd pay for them to be rebuilt as often as not, if he remembered. And every Hogswatch night, a side of venison. Regular, said Granny wistfully. Oh, yes, very respectful to witches he was, added Nanny Og. When he was out hunting people, if he ever met me in the woods, it was always off with his helmet, and I hopes I finds you well, Mistress Og. And next day, he'd send his butler down with a couple of bottles of something. He was a proper king. Hunting people isn't really right, though, said Magrat. Well, no, Granny Weatherwax conceded. But it was only if they'd done something bad. He said they enjoyed it, really, and he used to let them go if they gave him a good run. And then there was that great hairy thing of his, said Nanny Og. There was a perceptible change in the atmosphere. It became warmer, darker, filled at the corners with the shadows of unspoken conspiracy. Ah, said Granny Weatherwax distantly, his droit de seigneur. Needed a lot of exercise, said Nanny Og, staring at the fire. But next day he'd send his housekeeper around with a bag of silver and a hamper of stuff for the wedding, said Granny. Many a couple got a proper start in life thanks to that. Ah, agreed Nanny. One or two individuals, too. Every inch a king, said Granny. What are you talking about? Said Magrat suspiciously. Did he keep pets? The two witches surfaced from whatever deeper current they had been swimming in. Granny Weatherwax shrugged. I must say, Magrat went on in severe tones, if you think so much of the old king, you don't seem very worried about him being killed. I mean, it was a pretty suspicious accident. That's kings for you, said Granny. They come and go, good and bad. His father poisoned the king we had before. That was old Thorgum, said Nanny Og. Had a big red beard, I recall. He was very gracious too, you know. Only, now no one must say Felmet killed the king, said Magrat. What? Said Granny. He had some people executed in Lancre the other day for saying it, Magrat went on. Spreading malicious lies, he said. He said anyone saying different will see the inside of his dungeons, only not for long. He said Verence died of natural causes. Well, being assassinated is natural causes for a king, said Granny. I don't see why he's so sheepish about it. When old Thorgum was killed, they stuck his head on a pole, had a big bonfire, and everyone in the palace got drunk for a week. I remember, said Nanny. They carried his head all around the villages to show he was dead. Very convincing, I thought, especially for him. He was grinning. I think it was the way he would have liked to go. I think we might have to keep an eye on this one, though, said Granny. I think he might be a bit clever. That's not a good thing in a king. And I don't think he knows how to show respect. A man came to see me last week to ask if I wanted to pay any taxes, said Magrat. I told him no. I like that. He came to see me too, said Nanny Og. But our Jason and our Wayne went out and told him we didn't want to join. We didn't want to join. Small man, bald, black cloak, said Granny thoughtfully. Yes, said the other two. I am not even going to make it an attempt at merging those voices together. He was hanging about in my raspberry bushes, said Granny. Only, when I went out to see what he wanted, he ran away. Actually, I gave him tuppence, said Magrat. He said he was going to be tortured, you see, if he didn't get witches to pay their taxes. Lord Felmet looked carefully at the 2 coins in his lap. Then he looked at his tax-gatherer. "Well?" he said. The tax-gatherer cleared his throat. "Well, sir, you see, I explained about the need to employ a standing army, etc., and they said why, and I said because of bandits, etc., and they said the bandits never bothered them." "And civil works?" Yes, well, I pointed out the need to build and maintain bridges, etc. "And?" "They said they didn't use them." "Ah," said the Duke knowledgeably. "They can't cross running water." "Not sure about that, sir. I think witches cross anything they like." "Did they say anything else?" said the Duke. The tax-gatherer twisted the hem of his robe distractedly. "Well, sir, I mentioned how taxes help to maintain the king's peace, sir." "And?" "They said the king should maintain his own peace, sir, and then they gave me a look." "What sort of look?" The Duke sat with his thin face cupped in one hand. He was fascinated. "It's sort of hard to describe," said the taxman. He tried to avoid Lord Felmet's gaze, which was giving him the distinct impression that the tiled floor was fleeing away in all directions and had already covered several acres. Lord Felmet's fascination was to him what a pin is to a purple emperor. It's a type of butterfly, in case you're wondering. "Try," the Duke invited. The taxman blushed. "Well," he said, "it wasn't nice." Which demonstrates that the tax-gatherer was much better at figures than words. What he would have said, if embarrassment, fear, poor memory, and a complete lack of any kind of imagination hadn't conspired against it, was, "When I was a little boy and staying with my aunt, and she had told me not to touch the cream, etc., and she had put it on a high shelf in the pantry, and I got a stool and went after it when she was out anyway, and she'd come back, and I didn't know, and I couldn't reach the bowl properly, and it smashed on the floor, and she opened the door and glared at me. It was that look. But the worst thing was, they knew it." "Not nice," said the Duke. "No, sir." The Duke drummed the fingers of his left hand on the arm of his throne. The tax-gatherer coughed again. You're not going to force me to go back, are you?" he said. Said the Duke. He waved a hand irritably. "No, no," he said. "Not at all. Just call in at the torturer on your way out. See when he can fit you in." The taxman gave him a look of gratitude and bobbed a bow. "Yes, sir. At once, sir. Thank you, sir. You're very—" "Yes, yes," said Lord Felmet absently. "You may go." You know, he's probably going to do just that, too. The Duke was left alone in the vastness of the hall. It was raining again. Every once in a while, a piece of plaster smashed down on the tiles, and there was a crunching from the walls as they settled still further. The air smelled of old cellars. Sharky say, "Just like the fool sleeping on the floor." Gods, he hated this kingdom. It was so small. only 40 miles long and maybe 10 miles wide, and nearly all of it was cruel mountains with ice-green slopes and knife-edge crests, or dense huddled forests. A kingdom like that shouldn't be any trouble. What he couldn't quite fathom was this feeling that it had depth. It seemed to contain far too much geography. He rose and paced the floor to the balcony with its unrivaled view of trees. It struck him that the trees were also looking back at him. Farmo says maybe the torturer will just give him a good back readjustment. Yeah, every now and then I think maybe a little bit of time on the rack wouldn't be so bad. You know, in moderation. Sharkies say they've got rocks and trees and trees and rocks and mountains. Because they haven't particularly mentioned the water. So mountains. They have mentioned rain. I'm not sure if that qualifies for featuring in the song, though. Farmos is wondering if they have like a thing where you hang from your ankles for health reasons. I know I've seen those things that are like pull-up bars, except you strap your feet onto them and then you do sit-ups. So, I mean, you could just not do the sit-ups, I guess. It struck him that the trees were also looking back at him. Maybe this torturer doubles as an acupuncturist? He could feel the resentment. So can the tax collector. But that was odd, because the people themselves hadn't objected. They didn't seem to object to anything very much. Verence had been popular enough, in his way. There'd been quite a turnout for the funeral. He recalled the lines of solemn faces. Not stupid faces. By no means stupid. Just preoccupied. As though what kings did wasn't really very important. He found that almost as annoying as trees. A jolly good riot, now, that would have been more appropriate. One could have ridden out and hanged people, and there would have been the creative tension so essential to the proper development of the state. Back down on the plains, if you kicked people, they kicked back. Up here, when you kicked people, they moved away and just waited patiently for your leg to fall off. How could a king go down in history ruling a people like that? You couldn't oppress them any more than you could oppress a mattress. He had raised taxes and burned a few villages on general principles, just to show everyone who they were dealing with. It didn't seem to have any effect. And then there were these witches. They haunted him. Fool! The fool, who had been having a quiet doze behind the throne, awoke in terror. Yes? Come hither, fool. I'm slipping into the wrong voice. The fool jingled miserably across the floor. Tell me, fool, does it always rain here? Marry, nuncle, just answer the question, said Lord Felmet, with iron patience. Sometimes it stops, sir, to make room for the snow, and sometimes we get some right squandering, orgulous fogs, said the fool. Orgulous? Said the Duke absently. The fool couldn't stop himself. His horrified ears heard his mouth blurt out, Thick, my lord, from the latation orgulum a soup or broth. But the Duke wasn't listening. Listening to the prattle of underlings was not, in his experience, particularly worthwhile. Sharky say, there's the water. Always rain. Yeah. Water! I am bored, fool. Let me entertain you, my lord, with many a merry quip and lightsome jest. Try me. The fool licked his dry lips. He hadn't actually expected this. King Verence had been happy enough just to give him a kick or throw a bottle at his head. A real king. I'm waiting. Make me laugh. The fool took the plunge. Why, sirrah, he quavered, why may a coddled fill horse be deemed the brother to a hiren candle in the night? The Duke frowned. The fool felt it better not to wait. Withal, because a candle may be greased, yet a fill horse be without a fat argier, or argier, he said, and, because it was part of the joke, patted Lord Felmet lightly with his balloon on a stick, and twanged his mandolin. The Duke's index finger tapped an abrupt tattoo on the arm of the throne. Yes, he said, and then what happened? That, was by way of being the whole thing, said the fool, and added, my granddad thought it was one of his best. I dare say he told it differently, said the Duke. He stood up. Summon my huntsman. I think I shall ride out on the chase. And you can come too. My lord, I cannot ride. For the first time that morning, Lord Felmet smiled. Capital, he said. We will give you a horse that can't be ridden. Ha, ha. He looked down at his bandages. And afterward, he told himself, I'll get the armorer to send me up a file. Ugh. So let's go back to that joke. Why may a coddled fill horse be deemed the brother to a hiren, Hiren, hiren candle in the night? Because a candle may be greased, yet a fill horse be without a fat argier. Does anyone understand any part of that? Sharky say this is months later, yeah? And he's still wearing bandages. And he's going to have the armorer send up a file. Ugh. A coddled fill horse. Okay, so pretty sure fill horse is horse. So why may a horse be deemed the brother to a candle in the night? Because a candle may be greased, yet a horse be without a fat argier. A-R-G-I-E-R. Because I'm wondering if this is like actually pure nonsense, or if like all of these things, a coddle is apparently a thin gruel given to sick people. So the horse isn't fed well. So it's a thin horse. Sharky say in a few more months he'll have to hire the blacksmith for new hands, maybe twice a year. Yeah, so it's like a thin horse. So they're the same because a candle may be greased. I don't know why you would grease a candle. Get a fill horse. Like a kind of harlot. Ooh. Maybe this is a dirty joke then. Yet a fill horse be without a fat argier. Okay, last word. Argier. Feel like this is the key. Well, anyways. Carrying on. A year went past. How about that? We got another time skip. I thought that this book, it's been a while since I've read this. I have read it in the past, but I was pretty sure that this was a book that covered a fair amount of time, especially considering, if we're going to get any developments with baby Tom John, he's got to have some time to grow up, right? Obsolete form of Algiers, maybe? That's probably not gonna be what they're talking about here. A year went past. The days followed one another patiently. Right back at the beginning of the multiverse, they had tried all passing at the same time, and it hadn't worked. Tom John, it's now spelled all one word, Tomjon. So it's not Tom space John. It's just Tom John. Tom John sat under Hwell's rickety table, watching his father as he walked up and down between the latties, waving one arm and talking. Vitoller always waved his arms when he spoke. If you tied his hands behind his back, he would be dumb. All right, he was saying. How about the king's brides? Last year, said the voice of Hwell. All right, then. We'll give them Mallow, the tyrant of Clatch, said Vitoller, and his larynx smoothly changed gear as his voice became a great rolling thing that could rattle the windows across the width of the average town square. In blood I came, and by blood rule, that none will dare assay these walls of blood. Lots of blood. We did it the year before, said Hwell calmly. Anyway, people are fed up with kings. They want a bit of a chuckle. They are not fed up with my kings, said Vitoller. My dear boy, people do not come to the theater to laugh. They come to experience, to learn, to wonder, to laugh, said Hwell flatly. Have a look at this one. Tom John heard the rustle of paper and the creak of wickerwork as Vitoller lowered his weight onto a props basket. A wizard of sorts, Vitoller read, or please yourself. Hwell stretched his legs under the table and dislodged Tom John. He hauled the boy out by one ear. What's this? Said Vitoller. Wizards? Demons? Imps? Merchants? I'm rather pleased with Act 2, Scene 4, said Hwell, propelling the toddler towards the prop box. Comic washing up with two servants. Any deathbed scenes? Said Vitoller hopefully. No, said Hwell, but I can do you a humorous monologue in Act 3. A humorous monologue? All right, there's room for a soliloquy in the last act, said Hwell hurriedly. I'll write one tonight, no problem. And a stabbing, said Vitoller, getting to his feet. A foul murder. That always goes down well. He strode away to organize the setting up of the stage. Quell sighed and picked up his quill. Somewhere behind the sacking walls was the town of Hangdog, which had somehow allowed itself to be built in a hollow perched in the nearly sheer walls of a canyon. There was plenty of flat ground in the round tops. The problem was that nearly all of it was vertical. Farmos is coming up with an explanation from the internet for the joke. I'm nervous. Quell didn't like the round tops, which was odd because it was traditional dwarf country and he was a dwarf. But he'd been banished from his tribe years ago, not only because of his claustrophobia, but also because he had a tendency to daydream. It was felt by the local dwarf king that this is not a valuable talent for someone who is supposed to swing a pickaxe without forgetting what he is supposed to hit with it. And so Quell had been given a very small bag of gold, the tribe's heartfelt best wishes, and a firm goodbye. It had happened that Vitteler's strolling players had been passing through at the time, and the dwarf had ventured one small copper coin on a performance of The Dragon of the Plains. He had watched it without a muscle moving in his face, gone back to his lodgings, and in the morning had knocked on Vitteler's latte with the first draft of King Under the Mountain. It wasn't, in fact, very good, but Vitteler had been perceptive enough to see that inside the hairy bullet head was an imagination big enough to bestride the world, and so, when the strolling players strolled off, one of them was running to keep up. Particles of raw inspiration sleet through the universe all the time. Every once in a while, one of them hits a receptive mind, which then invents DNA, or the flute sonata form, or a way of making light bulbs wear out in half the time. But most of them miss. Most people go through their lives without being hit by even one. Some people are even more unfortunate. They get them all. Such a one was Quell. Enough inspirations to equip a complete history of the performing arts poured continuously into a small, heavy skull designed by evolution to do nothing more spectacular than be remarkably resistant to axe blows. All right, let's see. Farmo says, how is a sick horse helped by a harlot's candle? Helped by? A candle can be used as grease, fat like caudle, if a horse needs it to become energetic. The joke is that because it's a harlot's candle, the grease might also means lubrication, and the energetic bit might be in terms of I thought like maybe that it was saying how is the candle similar to a horse, not how can it be helpful to a horse. All right. Karma says brother to like friend of. I see. What a good joke. I'm sure his grandfather told it differently. He licked his quill and looked bashfully around the camp. No one was watching. He carefully lifted up the wizard and revealed another stack of paper. It was another potboiler. Every page was stained with sweat, and the words themselves scrawled across the manuscript in a trellis of blots and crossing outs and tiny scribbled insertions. Wells stared at it for a moment, alone in a world that consisted of him, the next blank page, and the shouting, clamoring voices that haunted his dreams. He began to write. Free of Wells' never too stringent attention, Tom John pushed open the lid of the props hamper and, in the methodical way of the very young, began to unpack the crowns. The dwarf stuck out his tongue as he piloted the errant quill across the ink-speckled page. He'd found room for the star-crossed lovers, the comic grave diggers, and the hunchback king. It was the cats and the roller skates that were currently giving him trouble. A gurgle made him look up. For goodness' sake, lad, he said. It hardly fits. Put it back. The disc rolled into winter. Winter in the Ramtops could not honestly be described as a magical frosty wonderland, each twig laced with confections of brittle ice. Winter in the Ramtops didn't mess about. It was a gateway straight through to the primeval coldness that lived before the creation of the world. Winter in the Ramtops was several yards of snow, the forests a mere collection of shadowy green tunnels under the drifts. Winter meant the coming of the lazy wind, which couldn't be bothered to blow around people, and blew right through them instead. The idea that winter could actually be enjoyable would never have occurred to Ramtop people, who had 18 different words for snow. Footnote: all of them, unfortunately, unprintable. The ghost of King Verence, well, we haven't seen him for a while, prowled the battlements, although we've seen hints of him, bereft and hungry, and stared out across his beloved forests and waited his chance. It was a winter of portents. Comets sparkled against the chilled skies at night. Clouds, shaped mightily like whales and dragons, drifted over the land by day. In the village of Razorback, a cat gave birth to a two-headed kitten. But since Grebo, by dint of considerable effort, was every male ancestor for the last 30 generations, this probably wasn't all that portentous. However, in Bad Ass, a cockerel laid an egg and had to put up with some very embarrassing personal questions. In Lancre town, a man swore he'd met a man who had actually seen with his own eyes a tree get up and walk. A man swore he'd met a man who had actually seen a tree get up and walk. There was a short, sharp shower of shrimps. Sharky say the comparison of Verence to the Duke in their responses to trees is a kick the dog / pet the dog pairing. Pet the tree, kick the tree. Yep. Duke Felmet hates this whole kingdom, and Verence loved it, including the trees. There was a short, sharp shower of shrimps. There were odd lights in the sky. Geese walked backward. Above all of this flared the great curtains of cold fire that were the Aurora Coriolis, the hub lights, whose frosty tints illuminated and colored the midnight snows. Aurora Coriolis, at this time of year. Yes. Sharky say the Lanker Inquirer. Yep. The Daily Hub. There was nothing the least unusual about any of this. The Ramtops, which, as it were, lay across the disk's vast magical standing wave, like an iron bar dropped innocently across a pair of subway rails, were so saturated with magic that it was constantly discharging itself into the environment. People would wake up in the middle of the night and mutter, "Oh, it's just another bloody portent," and go back to sleep. Hogswatch night came around, marking the start of another year. And, with alarming suddenness, nothing happened. The skies were clear, the snow deep and crisp like icing sugar. The freezing forests were silent and smelled of tin. The only things that fell from the sky were the occasional fresh showers of snow. A man walked across the moors from Razorback to Lanker Town without seeing a single marshlight, headless dog, strolling tree, ghostly coach or comet, and had to be taken in by a tavern and given a drink to unsteady his nerves. The stoicism of the Ramtoppers, stoicism, right? Developed over the years as a sovereign resistance to the thaumaturgical chaos, found itself unable to cope with the sudden change. It was like a noise which isn't heard until it stops. Granny Weatherwax heard it now as she lay snug under a pile of quilts in her freezing bedroom. Hogswatch night is, traditionally, the one day of the disk's long year when witches are expected to stay at home, and she'd had an early night in the company of a bag of apples and a stone hot water bottle. But something had awoken her from her doze. An ordinary person would have crept downstairs, possibly armed with a poker. Granny simply hugged her knees and let her mind wander. It hadn't been in the house. She could feel the small, fast minds of mice and the fuzzy minds of her goats as they lay in their cozy flatulence in the outhouse. A hunting owl was a sudden dagger of alertness as it glided over the rooftops. Granny concentrated harder until her mind was full of the tiny chittering of the insects in the thatch and the woodworm in the beams. Nothing of interest there. She snuggled down and let herself drift out into the forest, which was silent except for the occasional muffled thump as snow slid off a tree. Even in midwinter, the forest was full of life, usually dozing in burrows or hibernating in the middle of trees. All as usual. Sharky say, I imagine if someone in Lanker saw a family of bears back-flipping over the hills, they would just say, "Pfft, must be Tuesday," and shut the curtains. Sounds right. All as usual. She spread herself further, to the high moors and the secret passes where the wolves ran silently over the frozen crust. She touched their minds, sharp as knives. Higher still, and there was nothing in the snowfields but packs of vermine. Footnote: the vermine is a small black and white furry creature, much famed for its pelt. It is a more careful relative of the lemming. It only throws itself over small pebbles. End of footnote. Everything was as it should be, with the exception that nothing was right. There was something, yes, there was something alive out there. Something young and ancient and... Granny turned over the feeling in her mind. Yes, that was it. Something forlorn, something lost, and... Feelings were never simple, Granny knew. Strip them away and there were others underneath. Something that, if it didn't stop feeling lost and forlorn very soon, was going to get angry. And still, she couldn't find it. She could feel the tiny mines of chrysalises down under the frozen leaf mold. She could sense the earthworms which had migrated below the frost line. She could even sense a few people, who were hardest of all. Human minds were thinking so many thoughts all at the same time that they were nearly impossible to locate. It was like trying to nail fog to the wall. Nothing there. Nothing there. The feeling was all around her, and there was nothing to cause it. She'd gone down about as far as she could, to the smallest creature in the kingdom, and there was nothing there. Granny Weatherwax sat up in bed, lit a candle, and reached for an apple. She glared at her bedroom wall. She didn't like being beaten. There was something out there, something drinking in magic, something growing, something that seemed so alive that it was all around the house, and she couldn't find it. She reduced the apple to its core and placed it carefully in the tray of the candlestick. Then she blew out the candle. The cold velvet of the night slid back into the room. Granny had one last try. Perhaps she was looking in the wrong way. A moment later, she was lying on the floor with the pillow clasped around her head. And to think, she had expected it to be small. All right, let's see how long this next section is. It's 8:30. It's Friday. Usually people are good to go a little longer on Fridays, but I feel like my voice is getting a little raspy. A few more pages from page 64 to page 68. Let's do another 4 pages. Lancre Castle shook. It wasn't a violent shaking, but it didn't need to be, the construction of the castle being such that it swayed slightly, even in a gentle breeze. A small turret toppled slowly into the depths of the misty canyon. The fool lay on his flagstones and shivered in his sleep. He appreciated the honor, if it was an honor, but sleeping in the corridor always made him dream of the Fool's Guild, behind whose severe gray walls he had trembled his way through 7 years of terrible tuition. The flagstones were slightly softer than the beds there, though. A few feet away, a suit of armor jingled gently. Its pike vibrated in its mailed glove, until, swishing through the night air like a swooping bat, it slid down and shattered the flagstone by the fool's ear. The fool sat up and realized he was still shivering. So was the floor. In Lord Felmet's room, the shaking sent cascades of dust down from the ancient 4-poster. He awoke from a dream that a great beast was tramping around the castle, and decided with horror that it might be true. A portrait of some long-dead king fell off the wall. The Duke screamed. The fool stumbled in, trying to keep his balance on a floor that was now heaving like the sea, and the Duke staggered out of bed and grabbed the little man by his jerkin. "What's happening?" he hissed. "Is it an earthquake?" "We don't have them in these parts, my lord," said the fool, and was knocked aside as a chaise longue drifted slowly across the carpet. Yeah, chaise longue. If you haven't heard of the band Wet Leg, I would suggest looking up the song Chaise Longue. It's pretty entertaining. The band in general, I like most of their songs I've heard so far. I think I like all of the songs I've heard from them so far. They've got a song titled Chaise Longue. On the chaise longue, on the chaise longue. Sharkies love that song. It feels like the best of mid-90s garage rock. Nice. I'm glad you know it. The fool was knocked aside as a chaise longue drifted slowly across the carpet. The Duke dashed to the window and looked out at the forests in the moonlight. The white-capped trees shook in the still night air. A slab of plaster crashed onto the floor. Lord Felmet spun around, and this time his grip lifted the fool a foot off the floor. Among the very many luxuries the Duke had dispensed with in his life was that of ignorance. He liked to feel he knew what was going on. The glorious uncertainties of existence held no attraction for him. "It's the witches, isn't it?" he growled, his left cheek beginning to twitch like a landed fish. "They're out there, aren't they? They're putting an influence on the castle, aren't they?" "Marry, nuncle," the fool began. "They run this country, don't they?" "No, my lord, they've never—" "Who asked you?" The fool was trembling with fear and perfect antiphase to the castle, so that he was the only thing that now appeared to be standing perfectly still. You did, my lord," he quavered. "Are you arguing with me?" "No, my lord." "I thought so. You're in league with them, I suppose?" "My lord," said the fool, really shocked. "You're all in league, you people," the Duke snarled. "The whole bunch of you. You're nothing but a pack of ringleaders." A pack of ringleaders. He flung the fool aside and thrust the tall windows open, striding out into the freezing night air. He glared out over the sleeping kingdom. "Do you all hear me?" he screamed. "I am the king!" The shaking stopped, catching the Duke off balance. He steadied himself quickly and brushed the plaster dust off his nightshirt. "Right, then," he said. The Sharkies say, "We have no lord. We're an autonomous commune." What kind of government system? But this was worse. Now the forest was listening. The words he spoke vanished into a great vacuum of silence. There was something out there. He could feel it. It was strong enough to shake the castle, and now it was watching him, listening to him. The Duke backed away, very carefully, fumbling behind him for the window catch. He stepped carefully into the room, shut the windows, and hurriedly pulled the curtains across. "I am the king," he repeated quietly. He looked at the fool, who felt that something was expected of him. The man is my lord and master, he thought. I have eaten his salt, or whatever all that business was. They told me at guild school that a fool should be faithful to his master until the very end, after all others have deserted him. Good or bad doesn't come into it. Every leader needs his fool. There is only loyalty. That's the whole thing. Even if he is clearly 3 parts bonkers, I'm his fool until one of us dies. To his horror, he realized the Duke was weeping. The fool fumbled in his sleeve and produced a rather soiled red and yellow handkerchief embroidered with bells. The Duke took it with an expression of pathetic gratitude and blew his nose. Then he held it away from him and gazed at it with demented suspicion. "Is this a dagger I see before me?" he mumbled. No, my lord. It's my handkerchief, you see. You can sort of tell the difference if you look closely. It doesn't have as many sharp edges." "Good fool," said the Duke vaguely. Totally mad, the fool thought. Several bricks short of a bundle. So far around the twist, you could use them to open wine bottles. "Kneel beside me, my fool." The fool did so. The Duke laid a soiled bandage on his shoulder. It's been over a year now. "Are you loyal, fool?" he said. "Are you trustworthy?" "I swore to follow my lord until death," said the fool hoarsely. Benedict. Hey. The Duke pressed his mad face close to the fool, who looked up into a pair of bloodshot eyes. "I didn't want to," he hissed conspiratorially. "They made me do it. I didn't want." The door swung open. The Duchess filled the doorway. In fact, she was nearly the same shape. "Leonol!" she barked. I think this is the first time we've heard Lord Felmet's first name. Apparently it's Leonol. The fool was fascinated by what happened to the Duke's eyes. The mad red flame vanished, was sucked backward, and was replaced by the hard blue stare he had come to recognize. It didn't mean, he realized, that the Duke was any less mad. Even the coldness of his sanity was madness in a way. The Duke had a mind that ticked like a clock, and, like a clock, it regularly went cuckoo. Lord Felmet looked up calmly. "Yes, my dear." "What is the meaning of all this?" she demanded. "Witches, I suspect," said Lord Felmet. "I really don't think," the fool began. Lady Felmet's glare didn't merely silence him. It almost nailed him to the wall. "That is clearly apparent," she said. "You are an idiot." "A fool, my lady." "As well," she added, and turned back to her husband. "So," she said, smiling grimly, "still they defy you." The Duke shrugged. "How should I fight magic?" he said. "With words," said the fool, without thinking, and was instantly sorry. They were both staring at him. "What?" said the Duchess. The fool dropped his mandolin in embarrassment. In the guild, said the fool, we learned that words can be more powerful even than magic. Clown, said the Duke. Words are just words, brief syllables. Sticks and stones may break my bones. He paused, savoring the thought, but words can never hurt me. My lord, there are such words that can, said the fool. Liar, usurper, murderer! The Duke jerked back and gripped the arms of the throne, wincing. Such words have no truth, said the fool hurriedly, but they can spread like fire underground, breaking out to burn. It's true, screamed the Duke. I hear them all the time. He leaned forward. It's the witches, he hissed. Then they can be fought with other words, said the fool. Words can fight even witches. What words? Said the Duchess thoughtfully. The fool shrugged. Crone, evil eye, stupid old woman. The Duchess raised one thick eyebrow. You are not entirely an idiot, are you? She said. You refer to rumor. Just so, my lady. The fool rolled his eyes. What had he got himself into? It's the witches, whispered the Duke, to no one in particular. We must tell the world about the witches. They're evil. They make it come back, the blood. Even sandpaper doesn't work. Yeesh. All right, I'm going to stop there for the night on page 68. Parts of this book are a little grim, aren't they? It's an interesting balance in Sir Pratchett's writing, how he can have all that humor in there, but still tell a serious story with it. Sharky say he's got a poor grasp of biology, Lord Felmet. Yeah. He just doesn't consider that it, could be his blood. Books, Brews, and Booze thinks the Fool is a favorite. Yeah, the Fool is an interesting character. Definitely like learning more about him. Just in this part here, we've learned about the guild. The Fool's Guild. If you've read any other, like in Ankh-Morpork, there are lots of guilds. There's the Thieves Guild, the Clowns Guild. I think the Clowns Guild is different from the Fool's Guild. There's the Beggars Guild, the Seamstresses Guild, the Assassins Guild. And they're all kept in line by Lord Vetinari. I imagine the Fool's Guild is probably in Ankh-Morpork, but I don't know for sure. Pharma says there are certain types of psychoses where logic is not at home, and all that matters is that the thing that can't happen, happens. Sharky say Discworld is definitely set up where every profession has a school. Yeah, even things that you wouldn't consider to be regular professions. That said, I don't recall there being any mention of a guards guild. Or, say, like a sailors guild. Pharma says compulsions, not very closely tied with logic and reason, generally. So, yeah. There were a few funny bits. tonight, but I'd say not as much humor overall. We dealt with a little more serious subject matter and a little more plot development, I guess. I'm coming back. Ben, chill. Chill, puppy. It's a pretty thick book, actually. Yeah, I guess I didn't really say what I was doing. It'd be weird if I was leaving for the night. Yeah. Discworld role-playing game by Terry Pratchett and Phil Masters, illustrated by Paul Kidby and Sean Murray. Paul Kidby, I think, is the one that did the more classic covers that we've seen before, like these illustrations over here. Got a pretty cool shot of the dragon and the guards, which we did not see before. So that's a neat shot from a book we've read. If it'll focus on it. Maybe, maybe not. Death rocking out on this side over here. Wizards up at the top there. One of them's got an arrow through his hat, but I don't see the word wizard printed anywhere on it. Oh, and the librarian is right about there, grinning away, as if I can get without the reflection from the screen. I do think it's still in print. It was, I bought this new. This is 2nd edition, first printing, published November 2016. And yeah, it's pretty hefty. I haven't actually, I think, played a GURPS system game before. Because I think it stands for, yeah, Generic Universal Role-Playing System from Steve Jackson Games. GURPS is versatile and allows you to define characters in enough detail to make them interesting individuals, but with real advantages and problems and unique abilities, skills, and flaws. Well, here's a section on witches. And wizards. We've got a serious witch. You're a witch at the top of your profession. Some would say near the top, but part of being a serious witch is not putting up with any mealy-mouthed nonsense. You might be much like the village witch, page 138, only especially competent. Alternatively, you may be a more idiosyncratic figure pursuing private interests. You should remember that, say, building a cottage out of confectionery deep in the woods is a sign that you're losing your grip. It puts you on a narrative path with no good endings, but the temptations of the iron oven and a good cackle can be hard to resist. Power notoriously comes with a price, and for a witch, that price means going along with the story. The trick is to make sure that your story is one of the longer, happier ones. Can I message you the ISBN? I sure can. I can even show it on screen right now. I'll just, yep. Maybe I can. Maybe I can't. Maybe I can just message it to you later. But yeah, it's a hefty book. It's 400, just over 400 pages. Magic rules. There's a page on inns in Ankh-Morpork. Inspirations, invisible writings. What do we got over here? Resograph. Restaurants. Bars in Ankh-Morpork. Costs in Ankh-Morpork. There's a page for Ridcully. Ships. Shapeshifters. Spirits. Spolt's forthright respirator spell. Splatters, aka bouncers. Sports, Ankh-Morpork. Football. Magical cheating. Skills. Thermometers. Corporal Swires is right before swords. Places where the sun does not shine. Page 239. Sharkies have yet to venture too far in different systems. A while ago, I bought a digital version of one based off of the Burning Wheel system, but I haven't read into it too much or tried it. Yeah, I've played in quite a few different systems. Most of the longer games I've played in mostly have been D&D, though I've been in a couple of longer running Exalted games. But yeah, I've played a variety of stuff. Yeah. Anyways, I've got some lovely Persian food waiting for me, and I'm quite hungry. So I'm gonna start a raid out to Slightly Stupid Bear. Go visit him, because he likes to visit us sometimes. And I'll send you the ISBN for that. And I hope everyone has a lovely weekend. And I'll see you next Wednesday, I think. Yeah, I'm pretty sure. All right. Have a good night, everyone. Gonna start that raid. Bye-bye. Say hi to Bear.